And I think of rare diseases with these like monogenic variants and the really severe phenotype as kind of the pioneers of the precision medicine that we all want, that could actually become a reality if we invest in this space. And so I don't think that it's selfish of us to say that we should invest in rare. I think rare is common. Everybody could benefit from it.
At 17, I was diagnosed with a rare disease, and when my younger sister was diagnosed with the same, I was unwilling to accept that there was nothing we could do to treat ourselves. That's why I went on a decade-long journey to figure out what was possible. I'm developing my own gene therapy and helping others do the same for their conditions. This isn't just about the science, it's actually about the humanity and what happens when you tell people that there is something they can do. These sets of conversations on this podcast, Solving Rare Disease, will go through all of the different things that it takes to go from a diagnosis to a customized treatment for a rare disease. Action creates hope. This is the fundamental thing I've learned as a rare disease patient trying to treat my own disease, and what I'm learning through many conversations with others doing the same. This is Solving Rare, with me, Stevie Ringel. Hey everyone, Stevie Ringel here. I'm a rare disease patient turned biotech builder, and I'm privileged to be joined here today on the Solving Rare podcast with Amy Krystosik, who has started the MED13 Foundation and a new for-profit biotech company. Amy, thanks so much for joining us, and I'm really excited to hear your story.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so take us back. The easiest place to start is at the beginning. So tell us, you are a parent of a rare disease child. Walk us through what it was like to go through that diagnostic process as a starting point.
Yeah, getting the diagnosis was actually helpful. It was a relief because my son was born and didn't grow. And there was a lot of grief that went with those first 2 years of not knowing what was going on. And so getting the diagnosis was actually really helpful. It allowed us to get access to services. It allowed us to connect with the right types of physicians and specialists who could help him survive. So those first 2 years were really just about helping him to survive, getting him on a G-tube, getting him some surgeries, and then getting him stable enough so that we could look up and look around and see what can we contribute to this ecosystem and what's already been built that we can build on top of.
Wow. It's a lot to process emotionally as parents to get that diagnosis. How long did it take post-diagnosis to flip the page and say, we're interested in treatment options and we want to understand how this world of therapies work? Like, walk me through that transition.
Yeah, well, I remember, so I was working at CZI at the time, and my manager is a computational biologist. So I remember the next day after we got the gene report, I went in and I showed her the report, and I was like, tell me what this means.
Yeah. Right, sure.
So she took me to ClinVar and the genome browser, and she started showing me how to navigate these different systems and look it up and understand, like, oh, evolutionarily this is really highly conserved and this is what it means, and it's a missense variant, this is what this means. And it turns out that really soon after she explained all of that to me, I ended up working on a multi-omics project, and so learned a lot more about it after. But that was really like my first dive into it. And then I remember just kind of putting it on the back shelf. Like, I knew about patient advocacy groups because we supported 94 of them at CZI through Rare as one, but I didn't think that I needed to make one. And then because of the work that I was doing on Variant Former, which ended up helping to predict gene expression of rare and unknown variants, I went to the Undiagnosed Hackathon at Wilhelm and Mayo Clinic and saw the ecosystem of what people were doing. And I went with my partner Alvaro, and he's a data engineer at Stanford who transfers electronic health records from the hospital to the research side. And throughout those 3 days there at that meeting, we were like, we could do something here, we could help. Because we had the best data in the world. It was curated by Mayo Clinic, specifically for this Undiagnosed Hackathon. We had experts from all around the world. And still in 2 days, we weren't able to make that much progress, which was really frustrating. And we're like, well, what are the bottlenecks here that we could help with? And then on top of that, I met Terry Jo Bitchell from Combined Brain, and she was just like the warmest, most welcoming person. I was so inspired, and she was there just at the right time to say, we can help you do this. So we joined, and that was when Arturo was just about to turn 3.
Wow.
That we decided to start the foundation.
And you went into the foundation thinking, what was your expectation? Like, you were going to treat your kid, that you were going to advance research for the whole community, both those things? Like, how did you think about the mission statement?
Yeah, well, I'm an epidemiologist by training, pediatric infectious diseases, so orphan diseases. And so I never thought of just treating Arturo. I always thought that you have to build a cohort. And so I remember reaching out to Gnome Bio, and I got the report, and I thought, well, okay, but now what about the other 200, right?
Sure.
And I know that there are more out there that we just don't know about yet. And so for me, it's really about building the evidence base of what are the commonalities across the cases and how can we work together to bring that to a clinical trial. Because I don't want to be fundraising by myself. I don't want to just cure my son. I want to just move the field forward. And honestly, like, my son is doing really, really well now that he has like the services that he needs. He's stable. I don't know if he'll ever develop beyond where he is today, but I feel secure in that he's going to have a good life. But if there's anything that we can do to help him or the cohort or science progress, like, we need to do that. This is an opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible amount of initiative to take, and a great, long-range vision of how you want to help the community. I'm curious, like, what did it actually look like to get started? Like, okay, congratulations, we're going to start a 501c3. That in and of itself is a big step, which I'm sure you could speak to. But in terms of actually aligning some researchers, like, that's intimidating to a lot of people. You and your husband are obviously super well connected and thoughtful in the space, but walk us through, like, a little bit about the process of building that team and kind of shaping the early playbook of the foundation.
Yeah. So luckily, my partner was able to put up a website, and that kind of makes people think you look very official, and so people started reaching out to us.
Yeah. Boom.
And then I started to use my skills, which is grant writing. And I find that when you write grants, it's actually just a forcing mechanism that allows you to build the right team and write down, like, some really clear objectives of what you want to do and how you want to do it together. It doesn't mean you're going to get funded, because usually you don't, but it attracts the right type of people who want to come back and continue in that hard process of actually figuring out what the steps are. And so, for example, one of the first grants that we wrote was with PCORI with the MED13 Foundation, because we're part of the metopathies. And I think that just by putting that out there, it creates the incentive for people to want to work together and think about, how can we work together? What's the right way in which we can do this? And we're writing one right now for Google AI for Science, because we think that if we can bring together researchers who understand nodal biology or the metopathies or how to get the right assays to find the common underlying mechanisms of biology, we can actually build the right teams that can bring in the cash. We don't know where it's going to come from, maybe from grants, maybe from investors, maybe from wealthy individuals. And so we're just putting it out there and getting started with attracting the right types of people. And I've been visiting a lot of conferences. Like, honestly, I'm kind of exhausted of flying to Boston every other week.
You can go to a conference every week for sure. And those red eyes are brutal. I'm literally signing up for ASGCT as we speak. And
yes, I will be there.
I get on the plane. It's amazing the team that you've been able to put together through grants as a forcing function. When you actually sit down with those experts and think about what are the steps to go from initial diagnosis to a treatment for your child, what are those big building blocks that you try to lay out as the necessary pieces?
Yeah. So I think the biggest gap that we are building towards right now and thinking through as a team is, how do we share data across patient advocacy groups and across biotech? And so there's been a disincentive to share data because PAGs are worried about IP and their product getting shelved. And that makes sense, because historically there haven't been markets large enough to support that full development cycle. And so we're trying to think through ways where we can build trust with PAGs, with biotech, and we can do some type of federated learning and data commons where folks can contribute their data, we can learn from it, and then when we find something of interest, we can decide at that point, do we want to move forward on this together and invest as equal partners in whatever that way looks like. And so I think having that conversation up front with all of our partners has been one of the biggest, most important, meatiest topics that we're covering right now. I think after we've shared the data, Then we want to triage patients into what's the right type of assays that we need to then look at. For example, one of the variants in our cohort is suspected to be underexpression. But when you dig into it, we've found out that maybe it's actually protein accumulation. And so that would be a different assay than we would be doing for example, a cohort of patients that might be underexpressed. And then different pathways for treatment and drug discovery going forward. And so we're trying to think about how do we properly triage patients, not by gene or variant, but by what's the right modality for those patients to get to treatment and ultimately to a clinical trial. I guess following up on that, we think about what's the right type of funding to get these cohorts through to clinical trials. And so we haven't been thinking so much about, we've been thinking more about the right type of capital. And so the two types that we've been thinking about have been like family offices or donor advised funds, and thinking about a double bottom line where people want a return on mission and a return on dollar. And so it's not going to be 30x in 6 months, it's going to be maybe 10x in 10 years. And building the right type of fund that kind of bundles the risk over time so that we can bring the right partners, the right capital, and the right cohorts all the way through this process. And so we've been thinking on a broader systems level approach about how to do that and the right partners to work with. Honestly, I think the science is kind of there. Like, the science works. And I don't think that that's necessarily where I need to invest my time. I think the experts are out there who can do it. I think it's more about building the right type of capital, the right type of cohorts, and the right types of partnerships.
So when you go into those rooms, family offices are commonly brought up here as a potential source of capital. They notoriously have, there's lots of places where that capital could be deployed, and you really have to make a compelling case to why your mission aligns with that family office's mission. How have those conversations gone so far, and what are you hearing as excitement around your approach, and what are you hearing as places where you need to de-risk more?
Yeah, those are great questions. I wish I had my finance guy, Babash, here with me. Maybe we shouldn't name him either yet.
You can use some AI and just push him right here in the chair.
Yeah, we can just push him right here in the chair. So I think the concern is always about, well, will the FDA then go back on what they've said? This isn't something that Congress has written into law.
Sure.
We only have the PRVs renewed through 2029. And they're worried about, well, what does this mean in practicality, the plausible mechanism framework? How is that actually done? Like, no one's ever used NAMs to get through a clinical trial before. And so how can we be sure that if we invest in this now, what's going to happen in 10 years? Will we really get a return on our investment? And I think that's work that needs to be done as a community with FDA, with Congress, with NIH, HHS. Like, all those players need to help us to get the right type of investments, because otherwise investors of all types are scared.
That's a good point. And it kind of goes back to your point on the data sharing and transparency of it all. When you talk to other people in the broader med ecosystem, but then also just parents, patient advocate leaders, everyone's excited about data sharing. I think I can say that, like, on your behalf, on the community's behalf. Everyone believes that we want to build together. There's often practical limits to that because there's a bunch of nooks and crannies of healthcare data that are just hard. I know your husband is very passionate about this as well in his work. Walk me through how you guys have thought about what it actually means to share data and how that is playing into some of the pitches that you're making for the entities you're working on.
Yeah, well, you've definitely got it right. If Oliver was sitting here next to me, he would say, "What do you mean we're going to share data? How are we going to do that?
Yeah.
What type of data are we going to share?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but we need to go figure it out, okay?" So we just had a conversation today. I was like, can we agree that we're going to continue on this discovery path? Because there are providers out there who will do federated data sharing for you. But then what does that mean? Are you going to be training an LLM on top of it to gather the insights out of it? Or are you just going to be doing labeling on top of it? Or are you just going to be doing queries against it? And so all of that matters. I think if you get the partners in the room and you start having these conversations, you're going to have individual data use agreements with different partners. It's not going to be a one-size-fit-all. But I think if you put it out there that part of how we work together is we share data, then you're attracting the right types of partners who are willing to have that conversation, who are willing to go into those negotiations saying, yes, we want to move forward together. And I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. I think there's going to be lawyers involved. But I think putting it out there as a value of how we work together is the first step.
And when you think about taking those steps, like how do you think about MED13 Foundation's role in that ecosystem? Are you a catalyzer? Are you the people actually building that infrastructure and seeking then those grants that allow you to go build? How do you show up?
Yeah, we're both a catalyzer, getting the right partners in the room, and building the infrastructure through getting the grants. But I don't think we want to build everything. I think we want to partner with the right CROs or the right tech people to bring on those types of servers, because I don't want to be maintaining servers across the globe.
Yeah.
And whenever I bring this up to Alvaro, he reminds me of how much Stanford pays to do that work and how many people I would need to hire to do it. So I don't think that's MED13's role. I think our role is more as a catalyzer to have these conversations, to write the grants, and to make it possible to bring the right partners to the work.
One thing that I hear a lot from different parents is, I'm really busy taking care of my own family. And it sounds great to believe that out there maybe there's a genetic medicine I could take advantage of, but actually doing that work seems quite hard, intimidating, and intense. What do you say to other parents that are potentially interested in doing this for their own families? Like, what's your counsel to them about the work effort here and how they should think about it?
Yeah, I don't think that any family should have to do this, honestly. And I wish that I hadn't felt the need to do this. I wish that there had been a clinical trial open for my son. I wish that there had been a foundation who said, yes, we will help prioritize your son's data for you and get there. And I think it will be possible if we build it in the right way so that no other family has to do this. I think that's why having these conversations with the ecosystem is so important. But that being said, it's not impossible, because there's been so much already built that you can build on top of. Like I said, the first thing that we did was we joined Combined Brain, because they're basically from start to finish a CRO, but they're a nonprofit, and so they're willing to help you at a much reduced rate. There's also registries that you can join that are also free or low cost. But I think the problem is just having those pieces is not enough to get you all the way through. There's also the day-to-day of running a nonprofit or a for-profit that requires email outreach, going to conferences, learning a new field, that just is not sustainable without professional staff. And so, yeah, I guess my message to families is that I hope that no one else ever has to do this again, and we can just build a flywheel for rare diseases to become investable, and we don't need all these nonprofits.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we talk about a lot in our circles is, how does this become standard of care? And how does this actually even leave the realm of nonprofit-based investing and become something that's offered to you immediately following the diagnosis? Talk to me about your thinking around, looking at this from the nonprofit lens, the for-profit lens. What do you think it's really going to take to enact that future where this is standard of care? Like, what are the key gaps that, aside from some of the data biomarker pieces, where you're like, this is what's going to have to change in the way the system thinks?
Yeah, I think some of the key items that I've been thinking about have been kind of like the payer's return on this and what they're willing to pay. And what I've heard from a couple in the field has been that they're willing to pay $200K for a durable treatment. If we can de-risk some of the science that we have right now to actually get to a durable treatment at that price point, this could become standard of care very quickly. I don't think it's impossible. But in the meantime, there have been other insurance companies like Aradigm Health, and I'm not dropping a name just to drop a name, but I think that they've already gotten some notability from the CNBC Cures Summit about what they're trying to do to create this secondary insurance market where they're de-risking it. And so I think there are people who are being they're being creative about how to fund this and actually make it standard of care. And I think of rare diseases with these monogenic variants and the really severe phenotype as kind of the pioneers of the precision medicine that we all want, that could actually become a reality if we invest in this space. And so I don't think that it's selfish of us to say that we should invest in rare. I think rare is common. Everybody could benefit from it. And if we really want precision medicine for us and for our kids and for the next person who's going to need it, this is a great place to invest.
Yeah. It makes total sense to us sitting here. When you're out there pitching different forms of capital, do they agree with you?
Actually, yeah. They tell me to stop using the word rare disease
Okay.
because it's really bad marketing.
Yeah? What do they say to use instead?
They haven't come up with like a good term, but basically they say just do whatever oncology did, which is like basket trials.
Okay.
And so that's what we're trying to do. And then I try to say just precision medicine more often rather than rare disease, although sometimes people start to think about like longevity research, and that's not what I mean either. And so I don't know if we have really the right term yet, but maybe basket trials could be one of the things that we start using, but maybe just monogenic diseases, because then it makes it sound easier, right? Because monogenic is easier than these complicated multiple genes that we don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we talk about, being a CRO for genetic medicine all the time. And I think like keeping the word genetic front and center really brings about a certain image of a type of disease that's accurate, that is treatable with existing science. So I really like that a lot. The basket trial approach is definitely something that people have thought about for many years. And now, like you mentioned this a little bit before, there's the FDA's plausible mechanism framework that I think has a lot of people in the ecosystem, the community, and even investors that weren't necessarily part of this before now thinking about rare disease for the first time. Talk to me a little bit more about, like, have you dug into what it would mean to build a trial that is in line with the plausible mechanism framework? What are some of the things that you've thought through on that front, and like how could you imagine that working?
Yeah, again, I don't want to build anything by myself. So Terry Jo, I think of as a great mentor in this space, has been thinking about a master clinical protocol that we could be using across Combined Brain for all the 150 NDDs that are part of that consortium. And so I think a master clinical protocol would be great. I also think that using the Global Clinical Impression Scale as an outcome rather than only enrolling based on one single phenotype, what does it matter, or what is important to this patient and this patient's family as an outcome, and using that as the primary outcome on the clinical trial. And then I think there's also some folks in this space who've been thinking clearly about how to reduce the cost for clinical trials and bringing it to a more diverse population, rural areas, instead of having the high cost of bringing everybody to a medical center. And so, yeah, I think about, again, grouping by modality, the Global Clinical Impression Scale, the Master Clinical Protocol, and then a distributed clinical trials network where we're not all having to come together. Those would be the things that I think are top of mind. I'm sure there's a million other things that we could throw in there that are the devil is in the details, but those are like the high-level bins that I think about when I'm trying to think about reducing costs and increasing accessibility.
Yeah, I mean, that approach of repeatability and building a big tent makes a lot of sense. It definitely requires really strong communication with other parents where even if they're not building their own organization, they can get involved and potentially consent to have their child enrolled in that clinical trial and participate in some way, even if it's not in the same ways that you are. Talk to me about some of the early conversations you've had with other parents in the metopathies world. Like, what are you talking to them about? What's their reaction, reception to what you're doing? And how does it feel to talk parent to parent?
Yeah, well, I always start every conversation with a parent about the child. How's your child doing?
Totally, yes.
Yeah, and so we talk about our kids for a while and like laugh about what they're doing, and then they bring up like what it was like to get diagnosed, and they share their story with me. And so 90% of the conversation is just that. And then 10% of it is, well, how soon can we have a cure? And my answer to that is always like, how soon can you send me your data? Because you can't have a cure without the data. And so I think one of the really big friction points for families is, as you mentioned, families are really busy taking care of their own kids, and they don't want to fill out surveys, and they don't want to go have their blood drawn, and they don't want to do all the hoops and things that we've put in the way to protect families because of PHI. And so we need to think through, who are we protecting patients from when we're putting up all these hurdles to make it so difficult to collect data? Because they do want a cure, but they don't want all the inconvenience of going through the pre-discovery phase when it's not clear that there's actually any benefit or that we could get all the way to a treatment or a cure.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I can say as a rare disease patient, I'm like, here, take my data. Like, if you can do something useful with it. And obviously, I understand that not everyone feels that way. Everyone has their own perspective on data and data sharing. But I think generally speaking, our community is pretty aligned on that. So it's great for them to be able to share what exists. I think the challenge often comes up in, like, to your kind of second point there on doing the blood draws and doing some of this, actually creating net new data. It's one thing to say, take the data that was generated during my diagnostic work, but it's quite another to say I'm going to come in serially for blood draw time points. Solving that might require sending mobile phlebotomy to someone's house to, if they're consenting to draw blood from a child that might not be the easiest person to draw blood from, right? And so I feel like there's a lot of those like hidden challenges in this work. If you think about your work at CZI, like how did you think about structurally incentivizing or funding those types of missing and hidden pieces in the problem that it's easy to talk about data, it's easy to talk about therapies in terms of the impact. A lot of times those hidden operational pieces kind of go by the wayside. Talk to us a little bit about like how you think about funding those pieces.
Yeah, well, I think there's really only one major funder right now who's funding any of that work, and that's PCORI. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of funding for the operational pieces, as you mentioned, and the staff that is needed to run the day-to-day operations, and it's mostly led by volunteers, unfortunately. And so I think if we can build together more, then we can reduce that overhead by building together. So for example, this week, on May 1st, we are combining with the Test Research Foundation to join their roadshow. So we don't have to build our own, we can just have families come and join that roadshow and do the blood draw there. And it reduces cost. It also builds a little bit of a community where people feel they're not so alone in this because there's others doing it. But it's still a big barrier because we can't cover every city. As you said, there is the mobile phlebotomy, but that's very expensive. It's not really sustainable. And so if we could, again, get this to be standard of care in the clinic where you get your genetic diagnosis and then you have every year your annual, we are drawing clinical grade samples to be stored in this biorepository. And it's not something that's locked down that can't be accessed. It's something that researchers can request. I think that would be beautiful. Let's build that.
Yeah, amen. I think that would be an incredible asset that people are willing to participate in if you make it simple and easy and coordinated with the rest of their care, just like anything else in this world. One thing that I've been thinking about also is the role of AI and technology in some of those coordination and administration tasks. I've been thinking that a lot of the burden comes down to paperwork and this email from this researcher and this sign off here. Do you see any role for technology to make some of those coordination steps easier? And if so, how?
That's a really good question. We've been thinking about that. And because the community is so small and there's still a little bit of uncertainty around building trust in AI and what's AI's role in that, I don't want to be the first adopter and erode trust because it's clear when you're using AI versus when it's a human on the other end, right? And so if we could all make an agreement that we are okay with some of the pieces being automated, that would be great. But where do we want AI to play a role versus where do we still want the human touch and interaction? I think it's yet to be determined precisely where that line is. So that's a great question that I think as a community we have to put something out there.
And how do you bring the voice of the families into that decision collectively? Is there a forum to do that in? Do you have those conversations?
Yeah, well, you bring up a great question. How do we communicate with families? So families are on Facebook. That's how they find each other. I know that there's lots of other startups in this space who are thinking about creating other communities, but you're asking families to join a new app to maintain a new line of communication. And so there's that burden or that hurdle. We also have family meetings where we want to bring people together, but we have an international community. Travel is not always easy for everybody, so you have the virtual option. Okay. Then we have the one-to-one cold outreach where you're meeting up with families on Zooms or Google Meets. And that emotionally is actually really taxing because you can only do so many of these. I could reach out to all 600 families myself, but then I'm going to need about a year of rest because emotionally you have to relive the diagnosis each time you talk to a family and you do that. And so we do have some volunteers who help us to have those conversations now. But as you said, it's a lot of work. That's kind of hidden work to be done. And so where's the right place to have that conversation? I guess it starts with the board. We have some parents and families who are really dedicated and volunteer their time to be on the board and start the conversation there. And then we do quarterly webinars and we do monthly meetups, and so bring it up there.
Yeah, it is definitely those often, the repeated trust-building communications that I think makes the difference in this community. And building that within organizations and across them allows us to really understand who to trust. So it's awesome that even as a relatively new foundation, you're already investing heavily in building out not just digital and data infrastructure, but also human infrastructure that can really reach these people.
Yeah, and the families are very motivated. I always say to the board that we come and go with grace, and we accept that, like, maybe you can show up this month and maybe not next month, but you're still always welcome because we know you'll be here when you can.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. So Amy, we've talked about a lot of different things that you are doing yourself, with your partner, with a community. It's amazing. I imagine a lot of this is new, and it takes quite a bit of courage to set sail and to take on these initiatives. When you get stuck or lost and there's lack of clarity, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question that I think about a lot. It does take a lot of courage, as you mentioned, to do any of this. And so I try to lead with my values. And so I know that if I've failed, I've at least failed within my values that I'm aligned to. And so I try to check in on myself daily on that. And then there's a beautiful network of people out there who are willing to help, as yourself. I have reached out to you many times for help, so thank you. And so I ask. I don't want to rebuild anything or build it again if it's working well. And I also ask friends, what hasn't worked? What should I avoid and not try to repeat? And so I would say that this community has been really welcoming. And one of my friends has said that disability is a group that you can join anytime and anyone can join. And so I think the community has been really gracious and welcoming in that way.
Yeah, it is a wonderful community of differently abled people, and we thank you for being a patient organization leader that's really driving forward this work for your family, but also for the broader community. And you and your husband are two people that think really broadly about systems, which I really appreciate. And I am very excited to see what comes out of your multiple efforts and engagement over the coming years. I think we'll see a lot of progress.
Thank you.